We want to welcome everyone today. The Ohio TNC Agriculture team is proud to be presenting, as part of their Lunch and Learn series, the Midwest Cover Crop Council Cover Crop Selector tool. This is part 2 of this series. We will be going through the Cover Crop Selector tool in more detail with a farmer to help plan either summer or fall application of cover crops. Please join us in welcoming our guest speakers. Pete Dinius is joining us today. He is a Fulton County, Ohio farmer. Pete is also a farmer advocate for conservation for the Ohio TNC Agriculture team. We also like you to welcome Sarah Noggle. Sarah Noggle is the Midwest Cover Crop Council representative for the state of Ohio, and she also will be representing Ohio State Extension in Paulding County.
Soil health is also an important thing because I think we're called to be stewards of the land, and I think that is a good summary of soil health is a good summary of being a good steward. It's living in balance with my operation and nature, and it's amazing that when you can just let Mother Nature function, she really takes care of you.
Now let's join Pete and Sarah as they use some of Pete's management goals to select a cover crop option for one of the fields on Pete's farm.
The field I'm thinking of is going to be, let's say, Coiteville clay with no slope. And I think manure is a really good thing to use in a cover crop, especially after wheat. So I would say manure application, a summer manure application would be a good fit too.
All right, so Pete, let's kind of walk you through. In part 1, we went through that cover crop tool selector for an educational purpose, and so people could understand how to walk through. And now as we do this live, I'm going to get you set where you're going to go to that website. So if you can take a minute and bear with us as we do this on Zoom, it's mccc.msu.edu, and then we'll have you share your screen. And again, tonight we're going to keep in mind, you're looking at this for row crop. And so if you'll click on that row crop tool, and so we're going to start simple, and we're just going to click your state and your county. And then as we go through those goals, if you're looking at those, I'm going to have you start simple. We'll go back and add some more, but we're going to start with like that number 1 goal that you're thinking through for this. And so realizing that they all have different topics or goals, again, tied back to Midwest Cover Crops, Managing Cover Crops Profitably 3rd guide. And so going through, we'll start with that soil builder, and I want you to think specifically about a field. Maybe it's one of those problematic, or maybe it's one that maybe you haven't used cover crops. So go ahead and if you can put in what your cash crop option is for 2021. Okay, and then we're going to just select when that was planted.
Well, cool.
And so the reason that all this is doing is overlaying that time where you would have a cash crop in the ground. And so we're going to actually go through your drainage options, looking at how this one is just how well is that soil currently drained. And I want you to think not necessarily soil type, but that field. And then does it flood if that is. And then we're going to click find cover crops. And so as it looks at this timing, it's going to show that cash crop where it is in the gray area. And so I guess one of the things at the bottom, it just shows that based on the timing that, sorghum Sudan grass and Sudan grass don't work in that timing. The one thing that we did share last time was that the mixes are completely removed out of this. They'll be coming back in, but we can create some of our own mixes as we start to look at those things. And so, looking at that timing, where your cash crop is growing, what equipment do you have available? Are some of the things that I always think through, how are you going to establish this cover crop? And starting simple. So share with me, how are you planning to establish this, or what tools do you have available?
So I would have a broadcast seeder.
Okay.
That spreads 30 foot. And I would also have a disc or a grain drill. Okay.
Are there any special limitations that you can think of that, residual herbicides, if you're using herbicides? I guess I didn't even ask you that ahead of time. Or any of those type of things that you feel that would be a concern in this?
Not following wheat.
Not following wheat. Okay. So as you start to look at that, I know a little bit about your operation, but as far as management, sometimes timing is that. So do you have enough manpower? I'm thinking as we start to look through these different cover crops.
Okay. Yes.
So looking at the choices based on what you put into the selector tool, it comes back that winter cereal rye and annual ryegrass. And so are those options that you're interested in, or is it something different that you're looking at based on using that as a soil builder?
I would say the cereal rye seems interesting. I've only heard horror stories from annual ryegrass, so let's stick with simple.
Okay, so the one thing that I like to do is if you click on both of those, let's click once on cereal rye, and if you hold down your control button, it will open. It already opened in that other tab. And so as we start to look at that, I always start to say, okay, what are those potential disadvantages? I always go to the negative to say, okay, what am I going to possibly run into? So if you click over there underneath potential disadvantages, it's going to drop down that information. Is emergence an issue? It shows that it's rarely a problem. Increased weed potential, that's looking at that cover crop potentially becoming a weed in that season. And so while we know that cereal rye is one of the cover crops that can sometimes, if you don't manage that correctly, it can always get out of control a little bit. So coming back, looking at that insects, nematodes, I guess questions for you. Do you have anything like soybean cyst nematode problems in the field you're thinking of, or? Nope. Okay.
I would say not.
Okay. Usually in the heavy clays, we don't see as much of that soybean cyst nematode. So it does show that, looking at going into those grass type species, increased crop diseases, occasionally a minor problem, hinders crop. Again, I think it depends on your termination and your comfort with that. And so that could be a moderate problem. Your establishment challenges, cereal rye establishes, I would say, pretty easily, as long as there's some moisture there. And we just plan on the good Lord helping us out on that part. So, and then mature incorporation challenges, and then comments, pros and cons. Again, as we look through that, you can either, I know with your screen, as we're doing this on Zoom, you can click on some of the advantages and why you might want to use that cereal rye. And so share with me a little bit about the history of that farm, or the field you're thinking of. Has there been issues with it? I guess if you want that to be a soil builder, when I think of soil builder, I think of, potentially building that soil up so we can have that good nutrient flow through it, good water flow through that as a soil builder. And that's one of those definitions. So share with me about that field a little bit.
I would say that the topsoil is on the shallower side, and the subsoil is fairly high clay content.
Okay.
So the natural drainage is slow.
Okay. And so as we look through those advantages with using that cereal rye, I think, you can fit that in a shorter window as you start to look at that. While it doesn't attract beneficial insects as much as some of the other species, it's one of those that also can help once you have some soil health and you're looking at those different things over the years. It becomes like a sponge. The more you diversify your cover crop rotations along with your cash crops. The one thing I really like is that allelopathic properties of cereal rye, where that root zone, that area, it can control some of those weeds, especially some of the mare's tail, if you ever have mare's tail issue. And so I think changing up that chemistry in that soil a little bit helps to control that with those allelopathic. Again, and it also does loosens up the soil, it frees up the phosphorus and potassium in the soil. So other things that let's click over on your planting information. And so you've shared that you're probably going to broadcast this.
Yep.
And work that in. Does that sound correct?
Yes.
And so with broadcasting that, I think, there's a wide range of seeding. And I think that one thing that I always share with every producer I work with, are there any programs like H2 Ohio that you're in, or a small grains program through a local soil and water that we might have to think about this? Because I know you shared that, you wanted to get some manure on that soil. So any programs as far as things you need to take into consideration?
So most of my ground is not in H2O. The field that I'm particularly thinking of is not.
Okay. Well, and so one of the things that I guess just the caution with that is that sometimes their seeding rate, they have a specific range, and this range that we have in here, it is to get that cover crop established. Sometimes it's, if you were aerial seeding, it's going to be a heavier rate, obviously. And I think you fit that into your economics and the management of that as, where is your bottom line? What's that cereal rye going to cost? Making sure that we get that established, you get some growth on that, because if you go on that lower end of that seeding rate, you're going to not see, as much. It's going to help, but again, it might not help as much. And then going complete to the opposite end, if you go on that heaviest one, if you don't have some experience and you haven't thought way ahead about your termination, that heavier seeded cereal rye can be a bear sometimes, especially if you're, terminating, or if we would get really wet or really dry into that next season that you're going to. So let's look at, I guess, what questions do you have so far as we're walking through this?
I don't really have any.
Okay, that's fine. And this is meant to, keep this simple to walk you through.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is people need to think about that termination and those residual herbicides. And so let's click on that termination. So going, after your wheat, you'd have that cereal rye, and you're going into that next season. I'm assuming you're going into soybeans.
Let's go into corn. Or
okay,
soybeans would be really simple.
Okay. So I think that's the other thing. So how would you plan on terminating while you have tillage as an option, not that time of the year, but chemical, roller crimper? Are you going to use herbicide?
Chemical.
Okay, so you're going to do a chemical termination. The one thing that I always share on the termination, making sure that if you are a person that carries crop insurance, that you understand the timing of that, and just keep that in the back of your mind. I think there's more bells and whistles when you start to add these things in, that just as reminders for producers to think through as they're establishing. And so with that chemical termination, are you going to do that prior to planting? Is that your goal, or are you one of those ones where I'm okay terminating after I've planted?
Let's terminate it before
Okay.
I plant.
Okay. So more than likely you're going to look at that 2 weeks, thinking about that window, thinking about, soil temperatures. And that's the one thing when we talk about termination with the cover crops is what's going on the outside, not just saying, okay, I know I want to plant on this date and here's my 2 weeks before, but also thinking it, those weather expectancies, those different things that might change your plan. So what's the plan A, but what's plan B if we figure out, okay, it's going to be really wet or it's, really dry or it's still really cold or, as you go into that next crop, realizing those limitations with whatever herbicide that you are terminating with. So let's go back up to that cover crop selection information. We're kind of jumping around a little bit. And so this is just simple. I don't always open this up. It's basically what you chose on the other screen. It's just telling you, we just said it's a soil builder. Believe it or not, cereal rye in Ohio, while I think it's probably one of the most widely used, it's still considered an emerging cover crop based on some of the guidelines through NRCS within the state. So pop over to the other side underneath that, roles or performance and roles. And so, if you're looking at that as a dry matter, if you're going to work with any other, livestock producers, some of that, just realize those guidelines. It doesn't need nitrogen, but I know of some people that are putting a little bit just, in that season, depending on what they're using that for, if they are using that for any type of forage for livestock. And again, thinking about, how am I going to terminate, looking at the option to interseed that within that cash crop. I'm going to say you're going to get your wheat off and then come in and seed that cereal rye, would be more than likely, or do you think you're going to try that interseeding at all?
Let's keep it simple and stay away from interseeding for now.
Yep, and I think that's a good thought process, especially maybe depending on time of use with producers. And so we'll flip up those performance roles and go down into those cultural traits. And the one thing when you're establishing that in the summer, but just realizing if it's a different time of the year, that germination temperature, your soil pH, as you are pulling those soil samples regularly, knowing where that soil pH is one of the things that I talked with a producer actually out in Nebraska, and they had been using this, and I'm not sure how I got the phone call, but their soil pH was on a different species of cover crops, not cereal rye, but where their soil, they had more of an alkaline soil, and that cover crop just wasn't there. And so they weren't thinking through that. They're just like, well, it fits on this chart, and they weren't reading through all those. So it is a good drought tolerance and shade tolerance. It's very good. It'll hold up to quite a bit of water, but not too much. If it's going to sit there with wet feet on the cereal rye, it's not one that you'll see some problems come out. Again, it's going to survive the winter. That is definitely expected if you're looking at that for maybe even the fertilizer programs with Senate Bill 1 with manure. So the other thing that I would just share with you, we'll pull that cultural trait back up, is, and we won't necessarily click on these tonight, but looking at, here's the complete reference that will link you to, I guess you can click, if you hold down your control button and see the complete reference here. And so as this loads, the one thing I like that we've added in is the managing cover crops profitably. This will link to each one of the sections of that booklet. And so sometimes you don't have that booklet on hand. Some people, I'm still a book person, so I like to have that hard copy when I'm looking at a reference, but this does give you an option to even print that a little bit more, going above and beyond. And that is a free free guide as PDF downloadable. Again, you can purchase that one, but this is just going to go in more detail than what's right there in just that guide. And so I tell people, use this, this is hopefully helping you do some of your homework, where you're not trying to find this book and, okay, what page is it? It's all linked right up there. If you click, Pete, back on that very first tab where we were putting in your goals, going back through, if you want to put a second goal in here, and we'll just kind of show you what looks a little different from one to the next. I'm sorry, I didn't mean for you to go completely back. I'm like, no, you got to put both of them back in your cash crop.
Can I switch crops, or do you want me to?
Yeah,
stick?
you can. Absolutely. We can switch crops. This is for both of us to work together and help you out a little bit. And I tell people, as you start to think through, the one thing that's a little different on the tool is, it's kind of limited to that 1 year. They used to let you open up to 5 years in advance. That's not an option this time. And so you kind of just have to pretend like if I'm going through a corn, soybean, wheat rotation, or whatever my rotation is, I lay those side by side and kind of get that, what's my 3-year plan, or what's my 5-year plan? So as we start to look at those, as you start to add in some of those other goals, you can see that it again pulls them back up. And so it still pulls that winter cereal rye and that annual ryegrass, again, just in alphabetical order, not that one is better than the other. But looking through, when you get into the winter barley, the winter triticale, and winter wheat, those are other options, based on those. And so let's pull up a different one. You make a choice on, maybe you have a little bit of experience with these, or let's just learn and say, okay, which one do you think, like, you kind of, what's going on with cereal rye. What would be your next one if you were to go and walk yourself into a different one, I guess, based on those other ones?
You mind if I switch?
Nope, that's perfectly fine.
Sorry, I'm being.
No, this is what the tool, it's supposed to be, easy to use as you think through, and, you spend even an hour on this. An hour is a lot of time on it. So you're still thinking about that same field that we were just, what you were on? Is that what you're kind of looking at? Okay.
Yep.
And so once you change your drainage class, the one thing is, once you get into the poorly drained, it is going to ask, is there field tile? And I noticed on the, if you can see that, that was one of the things I know before, that we click pretty fast, but once you get into those lower drainage classes, they are going to ask, is there field tile? And again, the flooding options, it's based upon having that field tile there. So if you know that field, that tile is very old, and so, it might need updated, it might not, but let's look at your current conditions. So as you start to look into some of the other things, one of the new species that we added in there, it was actually the black oats, which you're perfectly fine. And I was going to say, let's look at spring oats. That's another simple one to start with, as far as establishing. And as we go through that one of the things I like about, the oats, most of the time, they will winter kill if we get a cold enough winter. And I think that's one of the things that, as you look at your management and, it mellows up the soil, as you start to look at those, clean bin run seed will suffice. And again, it tolerates cool temperatures. Again, it's got a lot of mycorrhizal properties. So the other thing that I would tell people too, as you're looking through those, the cover crop pocket guide, I like to use that with this once you have those established, I think that it gives you some great color pictures. And I'm a picture person that, you know, especially when we get into the mixes and you start to, if you go to that extreme of looking at, you know, even a 3 species mix, is this growing? You know, if I'm not used to that, and when you get into some of the other bigger mixes, I think I use that guide more to say, hey, here's what this looks like, here's what's going on.
What I like about the cover crop, the book, is it gives a picture of the plant, the seed, and if it has a flower. And that's really helpful for identification later on.
Well, and I'm excited to say that we are in the process. Actually, we've been meeting. We've got a March 1st review deadline for a new booklet. We update that every 4 to 5 years, and working with the Midwest Cover Crops Council, we've got even better pictures and a little bit more information. Some of those emerging species, we've moved into actual species with that. So I'm excited that that'll be out either late 2021 or right now we're saying 2022.
I hope you don't mind me diverting a little bit, but this is actually my cover crop after wheat.
Okay.
And that's beside a radish. And I don't know, this is totally off topic, but
No, that's okay. I think this is how we learn. I think it's sharing those experiences and talking through those species that,
yep,
you know, things that happen. So share with me what's going on in your pictures. And
so that was a radish beside a radish, and I could dig down with my hand.
So how many
see
years?
how-
I would, yeah. How many years
You can
have
see how
you used
crumbly
that?
the dirt is. And that's
Yep.
been probably no-till for 10 plus years.
And so no-till, and then how many years have you used cover crops on that or that field?
Probably all 10.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I guess it's been longer no-till than that, but I've probably been using a good cover crop on it for the last 8 years.
Okay.
Right.
So what are the changes, you know, that you can share with people as you started doing this?
It's just very, very encouraging to see how aggregated the soil is, and that I can dig in the ground with just my bare hands in
And
a very heavy clay ground, base ground.
so were there issues as you converted into, you know, no-till and starting using cover crops? Are there other things that you noticed with that? Or
Termination is something you gotta have a plan A, B, and C on. And that's why
absolutely.
I always add a little bit of oat. I mean, when I do a mix, I always add a little oats for something that'll winter kill and get my rye and my wheat, volunteer wheat, a little thinner. But I don't know, that's impressive to me.
Well, Pete, I don't know if there's any other questions that you have, but I appreciate you taking time just to walk through this with me. Are there any other things that you would share with producers that, you know, as they're starting out, or those lessons that you've learned?
I would say lessons I've learned is keep it simple for the first couple of years, and then divert. Try adding something a little more challenging.
And what's your one big takeaway, or what are those educational experiences? What's one of the biggest lessons? Maybe let's talk about establishment that you've learned.
One of the biggest challenges with establishment is I would say getting the seed where it needs to be, either soil, good soil contact, or just the getting timing together right before rain, or working when it needs to be.
Good. And then the biggest lesson you've learned with termination.
Biggest lesson is watch your daytime and nighttime temperatures. Once I started having challenges with that, someone gave me the little tidbit of information of your daytime and nighttime temperatures should add up to be 100 or more. then
Yep.
you'll have less problems with termination. And that's a true statement.
I tell people sometimes you have to throw out the calendar and not watch your neighbors, put your blinders on. You're like the racehorse with the blinders on. And sometimes slow and steady wins the race, but I think it's being patient that, and I think that's very hard if you're seeing people out, and you're working that. I think you just have to get that mindset that, hey, I'm in a different type of management and I'm going through those things differently. Anything else that we want to share? Not, I think Aaron and Pete, thanks for giving us a chance to work through this. I appreciate that, work with the Nature Conservancy, and Pete going through, that farmer advocate program. I think that that's a plus as we start to work with people. And I know that you'd probably be more than willing to have someone come out and talk to you or work through any of those scenarios or questions, looking through, even what's growing on your farm, getting someone out there.